Hello, I'm Kirk Freeman, teaching the art department here at Bethel University. My area is ceramics, so everything having to do with clay. I started in a smaller college, taught there for 8 years, and so it was a 3-person department. We had to teach across lines of our expertise into areas of our non-expertise. So I taught things like, two-dimensional design, three-dimensional design, little art history, advanced painting, advanced drawing. It was and some of those areas I had experience in, others I didn't. And so I think from that I learned how to tap other people's resources. There's a lot of experience that I kind of gained from other sources, other people that were very strong in their fields. And I also think I learned how to craft courses decently. That after leaving there, I have had a couple of stints where I was just a studio potter, so probably professionally that was important, and be able to bring that into my teaching. And then at Bethel, it's been all clay all the time, so it's been very nice in that way. So I can focus on the things that I feel that are important to me and that I can bring to the students. My style is relatively informal, I think, if there's a word for it. And I think because it's a studio course, it's a little different animal than most courses taught here at Bethel. They tend to be a little more informal. There's a lot more time spent with students individually. My courses are relatively structured, but I try to create them so they don't seem to be. There seems to be some fluidity to it, but in fact I'm layering the ideas and the processes that these students need to learn. But I don't know, I've just been kind of comfortable with making the course a comfortable situation for students to come into. It's funny because over the years I've done a little bit more and more of that, and I don't know if use of humor is sort of a dog and pony show that keeps the students interested, or if it's something that keeps me interested. But it does feel like it's something that I can bring to a course of this nature that seems to help a little bit, and it may break down some barriers, make students, I think, feel a little bit more comfortable with me, and so that's what I do. Probably my expertise is the first one. I mean, I've been doing this for a long time, and I do it both professionally as a working potter, but a teacher as well. But I think I have an ability to sort of translate that to the lives of the students, and so I don't know. My strength may be a way of kind of building my courses so they have logical stepping stones that students seem to be able to hang on to as they move through the course. Humor is probably a part of that too, but again, it's a studio course. I think it happens. It's an easier situation for studio artists oftentimes because you've got your students for 2+ hours. The first part of that is demonstration, lecture, all those sort of informational things. But the last part is always them working in the studio. You're able to work alongside them, sort of be amongst them, and so you're able to build up a little bit more maybe relationship, and maybe the comfort level there is a little bit easier for them. I've been thinking about this, especially as students have changed over the years. I seem to be clear on it maybe 15 to 20 years ago on how students learn. How I still think they learn, at least in my situation, is through sort of repetitive experience. And again, it's pretty unique, I think, as a potter, as a clay artist, as artists in general. I think there's a certain skill level that has to sort of be fleshed out in order for them to begin to make aesthetic judgments and create works that have that sort of foundation. And so for me and for most potters, it's repetitively working the steps. So you go first step, second step, and they layer these experiences atop one another in order to sort of have that foundation. And so when I create courses, I create them with that sort of, logical stepping stone sort of approach to the learning of this process, and then the learning of the kind of the aesthetics of ceramics. I think I've probably spoken to this a little bit, but it's that sort of reasonable layering of sort of the materials that I bring to the class, and I design it in such a way as to sort of remember what's gone on before and look forward to what's ahead as we kind of move through the discipline of kind of this sort of clay process. I think over the course of time, too, that's been important to me. I mean, certain things have worked and certain things haven't worked. And I go back to the drawing board, recreate a session. And so I've been at this long enough where I can kind of feel how the flow of the semester is going. But again, as we move from step to step, it seems to have a kind of an effect on the students that they can sort of grab hold of these things and move forward with it. Classes are kind of funny. I mean, there's a certain energy level, I think, to certain courses. I had some difficulties last semester, and I'm still trying to sort of figure that out. It just seemed like there was not all that much energy to the course, and it didn't seem like I could infuse it with much for some reason. And that was an unusual sort of situation for me. So I'm thinking through, am I getting old? Am I not relating as well? This semester seems like it's been much better, and I haven't done anything differently, and so there's a mystery to that. But I do sort of take temperature at certain points in time. I mean, I've got my sort of things systematized. The tests are at certain points in time. The demonstrations sort of follow this reasonable pattern. We introduce new sort of areas of interest when I think things are starting to sort of maybe slow down a little bit. And so, it's a lot of sort of wheel work, but there's also hand-building experiences. We're also kind of talking about work. We're also getting into glaze demonstrations and that sort of thing. And so I think as we kind of move along, that I try to introduce something new or a little bit different, or a little bit exciting, do something that will sort of recreate a little bit of fervor. Sometimes, it might be in me, being a little foolish, at a point in time where it might be called for. Assessment is really different, I think, for studio situations. There's no getting around that it's going to be a subjective evaluation on the part of the instructor for a great deal of the work. For me, it's 50% of the grade is based on the work that they turn at the end of the semester. So I've given them markers, obviously, on this is the things, this is what makes a strong form. These are the technical kinds of considerations. These are aesthetic sort of considerations. But they have to kind of come up with those things on their own. So it's understood that that's going to be a part of it, and I let them know up front, it's on the syllabus, can you live with this? But there are also some very kind of black and white sort of assessment areas. They take 3 tests during the course of the semester on cognitive information, clay and glazes and firing, and that sort of thing. And so they know where they stand in those areas. I also assess whether they show up. I mean, they're graded on being here. They have to be here, see the demonstration, get to the working on those forms right away while it's still fresh in their memory banks. And so they're rewarded for being here and penalized for not. And then there's the little gray area of initiative and involvement. That's something that I like to reward, and I do notice it, both in the work but also in people sort of being in the studio working. Their expectation is they will be, but I notice when they're putting over and above that expectation, and so I assess each of those areas. What you're about to see is a demonstration in a beginning ceramics course. I think it was probably 3 to 4 weeks into the course, so they've just kind of gotten their hands dirty, so to speak, for a month or so. They have learned in the previous session how to throw a bowl form, and in this session then they're going to learn how to turn it over, trim a foot rim into the base of that bowl form. The students are a spectrum of students. I have students in each course that are majors, art majors, but probably no more than 2 or 3 art majors per class. And then I've just got people across the board from freshman year to senior year, nursing students, education students, pre-med students. It's kind of a broad range of people that are just interested in taking it. This course is heavily based on demonstration, and I've spoken to that a little bit in that there's a skill level that needs to be developed. And so everything that they learn, they are viewing. And generally, I'll go through it twice in one session. Oftentimes, we'll do another review in another session. It depends on the kind of the difficulty of the form. But trying to allow them to just sort of see and then model what's being done. Along with that, then, after they get to their work, I circulate and try to remind them of what they just saw, because oftentimes it's fleeting. And so, no, you're holding the tool this way, or there's some really basic black and white sorts of simple things that need to go on for them to succeed. And so I try to make sure I hit those points. So, we are in the second step of our two-step process for bowls. We talked, and we're kind of shown how to throw the object. And then, today we're going to look at foot rims. So, the bowl is turned over. We're going to trim off this extra clay, leave this sort of platform, if you will, for the setting of the bowl. We're going to send one of these guys around just to sort of compare and contrast with what you're working with. So this is leather hard, and that's the state that we wanted this thing to get to. And when you kind of pass it around, grab it by the body of the thing rather than the rim, so you don't break chunks off, because I'll be using this one as my second demonstration. So, but you can kind of feel it. I mean, you can still get your thumbnail into it. It's still a little bit flexible. It could be a little softer than this. Yours could be, but you really don't want it to be really sticky. Could even be a little bit firmer, but this is kind of at the firm side of things. So check that out. That's the leather hard state. We've been kind of working on strategies. And, some of you may have succeeded in getting them to leather hard. Some of you may have failed and they dried up completely. But it takes a little while to get the timing down on this. Okay, so in order to trim this off successfully, we've got to kind of gauge this thing a little bit. We have to kind of figure out where we're going to be trimming, where we're not going to be trimming. So the first thing we want to do is decide where we begin. Take a thumb, finger, and you're running your hand down the inside, outside of the bowl, and where it begins to kind of spread out on you. Okay, you can tell it's getting thicker. You want to mark that. So in this case, these walls are pretty even and uniform to about right here, and then it begins to thicken up. So I'm just going to take a thumbnail or a mark or whatever and make a line there. So I know I can start trimming at this point, not much down below it. Okay. Second thing we want to do is sort of make a decision on where this foot rim is going to sit, how wide it should be, and that sort of corresponds to what's happening on the inside of the piece. Okay, if you have a very narrow platform, if it's coming down to a real kind of a V-like form inside, it's more likely you're going to have a smaller foot rim. If you have a wide-based bowl, flatter at the base, and then rounding out, you're going to have a correspondingly larger foot rim, so it fits the shape. And later on, I mean, these bowls we were going with sort of this half circle thing just to sort of develop that skill. But later on, as you spread out and kind of work on different forms, you're going to find that you're going to be making certain bowls purposefully maybe wider at the base, and those would be more utilitarian possibly because they're going to be more stable. Okay, so in that case, wider foot rim. More elegant form would be something that's really narrow at the base and then kind of flares out. And in that case, you'd have a narrower footprint that sort of fit the form. Now, as I look at this guy, even though it's rounded, there is a place where I would say the wall kind of begins to become a floor area. Okay, so this is the floor of the pot, and then it starts to sweep up into the body of this thing. And so about this wide, where my two fingers are, it's probably where I want to place that footprint. Right where that floorish area sort of begins to sweep up into the wall. So I'm looking at about 3+ inches. So what I'm going to do is, in order to sort of kind of keep some continuity here, I'm going to make a little mark there. So it's probably going to be about that wide on the base as well. So I've got my mark there, and I know that this is the clay then. I have a visual indicator that tells me trimming from this point to this point. Not going to get much narrower than this, not going to go much further down than that. Then we need to make a guess on how thick this is at the base. So a hand on the inside, a hand on the outside. It's a little difficult to gauge, but you can kind of get a feel for this. Is it like 1/4 inch thick? Is it 1/2 inch thick? 3/4 inch? And as I'm feeling this, it's probably 1/2 inch plus. I mean, it feels like it's maybe about that thick. So that's something I want to keep in mind when I'm taking the clay off here. Okay. Lastly, before we sort of set this down, take a look at the interior of the bowl and just get that in your memory banks. Okay, what is happening with the shape on the inside? Because we're going to be duplicating that shape on the outside. So if you've got a little sort of a dimple on the inside at the bottom, you want to make sure you realize that, so that when you're trimming that, you're not going to go down too deeply, or it doesn't go flat on the bottom and then round up into the walls. You're going to kind of correspondingly make the flatter floor before it rounds up into the walls. You have a wave in there somewhere that you want to know about before you trim. Sort of take that into consideration. Okay, so that's kind of preparing it for the trimming. Then we need to center this, recenter this on the wheel. And there are a few ways of going about it. Now, we got a few of these wheels that don't have bats on them. They have these concentric circles. And they're kind of nice because you can just sort of take the, place it within a concentric circle, even it off a little bit, and you can get pretty close to center and then just sort of fine tune it. When you're using bats like this, not quite as easily done. I mean, one thing that you could do, just to sort of ballpark it, would be to make, a few little. I don't want to get this real wet, but so that actually will kind of give you an idea of how close you are to being centered. But you're not centered yet because oftentimes the outside, the top of this pot has gotten a little wonky on it. I think you've probably seen that. Okay. So you're not going to trust this. You really need to center the upper section where you're going to be doing the trimming of this thing. But that gets you at least sort of close. Okay. So 2 ways of going about getting this on center. There's the quicker but more difficult way. It takes a little while to learn this. And there is the longer but probably more stable way of doing this. So the quicker, more difficult way is with your hands. And you're going to kind of brace your arms on your legs. You're going to surround this with your hands, but you're not really touching it all that much, with the exception of your thumbs here. And so as the clay comes around, as the bowl comes around, thumbs are up kind of toward the top. It's going to sort of scooch it a little bit. And you sort of develop a feel for this, but it kind of pops it on the center. Okay? And again, we can kind of look at this thing from the top and see that it's no longer wiggling. You're kind of looking at this circular motion that's pretty easy. All right? That's going to take a little while. Make sure that you get your hands surrounding this thing. Make sure you're not booking the clay too fast because it pops and your thing goes flying unless you have your hands kind of ready to catch it. So, but that may take a little bit of time. There's another method that you could try. I've never been able to kind of get this, but there are potters that just stick a bowl down, they go pop, 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 tap it right in the center, and it just sort of magically happens. You've been maybe lucky to try it. All right, second method takes a little bit longer, but it's pretty sure. I'm just going to throw this off center a little bit. And what you're going to be doing is kind of creating, you're going to be making marks on this piece that show you where it's furthest out from center. So you take your needle tool, you're not going to be running up to it really fast, you kind of sneak up on it, and just barely, and you're starting near the top, just barely let it sort of touch that clay, and it's going to create a line. Okay. All right, so the line indicates furthest out from center. You bring it around so you're staring straight at the line, and then you're just going to push directly away from it. And then you're going to go again. So just slightly below, I'll do it again. And again, it's kind of grazing the clay there. The line is now getting a little bit longer, and that means you're getting closer. So again, another little push. And then slightly below again. See, I've been fairly conservative on the pushes here. So I'll go one more time. I'm going to guess it'll be pretty close then. Okay. So that's pretty good. I mean, once you have a line that's pretty even all the way around, it's exhibiting that it's centered. So, I mean, this may take a little while. You might be hitting it, on one side for a while, and then you push too far, and then all of a sudden you notice the line has jumped over to the other side. So you have to kind of work your way into center, okay? If perchance you have done 4, 8, 10 lines on this thing, and you still haven't gotten it centered, and you've run the lines all the way down to toward the base here, you really need to kind of start over. But you have to sort of erase these guys first. Okay. The other thing I should say is, I mentioned it, but you need to start at the top, work your way down. So if you're random kind of in your line making, pretty hard to tell after the 10th, 12th line which one was the last one you laid down. So start at the top, work your way down. If it doesn't happen for you the first time around, hold this thing, sort of erase those lines, and then start again. But we're looking for a line that pretty much happens all the way around equal distance, and then we know it's on the center. And it's really important, you've got to get these things centered. Otherwise, this foot rim is going to be off to the side of the pot. You're going to have a real uneven. And one side of the wall is going to be quite thin, one side is going to be quite thick. And so centering is a big deal for the trimming of this thing. Then, we need to attach this to the wheel head. And I like to use what I call clay. C-L-A-Y, clay. And I don't think line, L-I-N-E, just in case you're writing. Oh, it doesn't carry you are. Okay, no. So what we're going to do is we're going to make coils out of clay. C-O-I-L, coil. And then multiple would be coils with an S on it. So we're going to do this, okay? Hand, and then one hand. The hand is forward, backward, backward. She's going to mock me. But what you're going to do is this. And that's not going to do anything. You need to have, one hand going forward while the other one's going backward, with pressure between the two, and a coil is made. Okay, so we need 4 of those guys. So when you're attaching this thing, you need to hold the piece down firmly to the wheel head. If you don't, and you just shove this down, it's going to shove it off center again. You'll have to start all over again. So hold this thing down. Press the clay around the piece. And we're stuck down. One of the reasons that when we were throwing the bowls, I said you really want the top 2-3 inches to be as thin as you want it to be when it's finished is because of this. Because of the way you're attaching it, you're not going to be able to trim it all the way down to the base. And so we want this thin enough where we don't have to deal with that. Okay, new tools for the day. We're going to do some trimming tools here. So we're holding it like this. You've got the handle and a little bit of a brace on the forefinger here. And then generally with my left hand, I'm just letting it kind of slide with the piece. So I'm kind of engaged with both hands here. And I've got this thumb bracing the tool. And you're going to have to find the angle that works. I mean, obviously this is not working out real well. Okay? So we're going to have to kind of figure out, and once you start seeing this stuff sort of trim away from the piece, you know you're in the right place. We don't want to start with the tool on its side like this. Even though it's trimming some clay away, it tends to start riding with the pot, and all of a sudden you get this really wavy surface. We want to be cutting through that clay. So we start off with the smallest loop, and you're going to have to find an angle, get it out there a little bit. If, this is much more comfortable. You're going to have to find a way to turn this thing, and then begin trimming this clay away. And we've got our 2 marks. Okay, I know I can go as far as this, and I'm already kind of into where I want to go with the foot. I erased it when I was fiddling around here. But I'd say right about there, I'm going to establish that circle for the foot rim. And then all of this stuff is extra clay. And as I said before, we're trying to mimic what happened on the inside. We're going to establish, and there are a lot of different shaped bowls, and there are bowls that don't have a defined foot rim where it just runs up and ends. But we want to, at this point, kind of learn how to work with these defined platforms, if you will, footprints. And so I'm going to establish that just by cutting down a little bit more. Okay. Then this is fairly clumsy. I mean, visually it kind of comes up, backs in. I know that the interior of the bowl has this rounded thing, and so I'm going to go a step or 2 further by just taking away this extra clay to mimic the form on the inside of the piece. So most of the clay is taken away with this smallest little curved thing. You can then sort of turn this over, and this is a bit of a fine tuning. Okay. Finally, after you've done all the taking away of the clay, to finish this off, then you can turn it on its side and use the side of the tool to shave this surface a bit. Okay, so that gets rid of the extra clay on the outside. It establishes the foot rim, and you can do some things then visually with this foot rim. One of the simplest things is just to use the curve of the tool here, but it could be straight up and down. It could splay out a little bit. All I'm going to do is use the curve of the tool to define this a little bit, and that'll do me for the exterior. Okay. Next, we need to take out the clay from the interior now, and so we're going to change tools. This is a smaller trimming tool. You'll find both of them over in our little cabinet there. Smallest end first. There's kind of a wider end, smaller end. We're going to go with the smaller end. And again, with my left hand, I'm just letting this kind of ride like this. And I'm going to place this tool right on my thumb instead of going at it like this, which can, if you're not careful, you can kind of jerk into the rim and take part of it out. So I'm using my thumb as a little bit of a barrier there. I'm going to take the very end of this thing and just begin to carve down into it. Okay, so I think I can go one more time. By the way, when you're trimming the interior, you're going to get all these little kind of scraps of clay that are in there, and you probably noticed every once in a while you're going to have to blow that stuff out of there. Okay? If you are a gum chewer, or tobacco, which I think is a disgusting habit we need to talk about. You're going to have to find a way to tuck that away somewhere, okay? You're going to get it underneath a tongue, possibly, or back on a back tube, something like that. You can't get it in the airflow, because you're blowing with great velocity, like that. And it closed a little encasement, and it can shoot out of that thing, high velocity. Gum is a kind of a rubbery substance, bounces off. It can take your eye out. You wear glasses, that's pretty good. But it can also take your neighbor's eye out. And that's like a just kind of clean up the edge of this a little bit. And then you can turn the tool on its side and just shave this thing a bit. And you can even turn it at an angle if you need to get into the corners. But that kind of cleans things up at the base. Some people, I'm not one of them, but some people burnish the entire thing. And I've never been sure as to why, because once you put glaze on it, you can't tell whether it's been burnished or not. But I still like to do that. And soft and smooth. That's probably what, just a tactile thing. That's probably what was important. Okay. In fact, you know, if I were to describe this, I would say this is as smooth as the baby's behind. Right here. Okay, this will be interesting. Does anyone have access to a baby? Your sister have a baby, or you work in, you nanny or anything like that? Oh, we can get one from over at the seminary. They have a child resource center thing with it. Anyway, I think what we're going to do, this will be really good, is we're going to get a little baby. Okay, I know some of you have access. You've heard of it. And this is the fun game. So we just blindfold people, okay? And then we hold a bowl freshly trimmed up to one cheek, rub it around a little baby like this, up to this. And I'm telling you, you cannot tell the difference. It's amazing. They're both kind of cold and clammy like this. Okay. So we're going to send this around, and it's kind of a before and after thing. You kind of felt the pot that was sent around earlier, but this is a trimmed form now. And we're going to do it one more time.
Can you do any carving to the bowl?
Yeah, and you could do some decorative stuff on the exterior, and you know, kind of play with the footrest. I mean, you can do a number of things. That's pretty much kind of a simple process. But if you want, you could do a series of lines on the outside, or whatever you like to. Same thing with the footprint itself. It could be a little bit more defined, but your hands kind of carved into it. A studio, and I was working on my own. Okay, working on my own work. And when I do that, oftentimes I'll get into what I call the zone. Okay, this is the creative zone. Many of you are never going to find yourself in that zone. It's only for special people like myself and just a few others. Now, what happens in the creative zone is almost a hypnotic state, really. I start to concentrate, all my powers are concentrated on this work of art that I'm engaged with. And everything else slides away. Okay, I can't hear things. I can see only one thing. And it's just really an amazing, powerful place to be. Okay, this is without any help from chemicals. All on my own. Now, for some reason, I did hear something that one day. Oh, by the way, if you see me in the zone, there are some visual. You'll be able to notice because I'll be doing this thing. My eyes get kind of crossed. Okay, so when I look at you and they're kind of crossed, that means that, and I also drool. So if I'm cross-eyed and drooling, he's in the zone, don't bother. Okay. So anyway, one day I hear, it's a really high, screechy sort of sound, and it's coming from that direction. Well, I'm in the zone, and I just kind of push it out. But a little bit later, okay, it's this high, piercing sound. And it finally sort of cuts through my zonedom. And I look into that room, and there's these two big guys, football player kind of guys. Okay? Have you ever noticed how big guys, when they get really mad, their voices raise about 7 octaves, and they're really high all of a sudden? So they're both holding a bowl. Okay? And it turns out they're saying, it's my bowl. It's my bowl. They're back and forth, tugging on a bowl like this, and it's a bowl that's been bisqued, so they're not breaking. Okay? That's before I had everybody sign their pieces. So inevitably, there would be, 100 bowls that had been bisqued, got kind of this state, and there's always 3 or 4 really nice ones. Generally, they're the ones that I demonstrated, but they thought it was theirs. They hadn't signed it, and they're fighting over this thing. Okay? So, I get up, wipe my mouth off, go in there, and I said, give me that bowl. I take the bowl, I cut this bowl in half, give you each a half a bowl. And then one of the guys said, no, don't do that. Give it to him. So that's how I knew who belonged to the bowl. Right? I don't have to do that all the time, so it's a lot easier if you sign it. Now, any questions about that? Okay, so I think that's it for our trimming demonstration. You can find yours and get to it.
So what are you seeing with this group?
Well, I'm seeing, I think they seem to be kind of where my standard classes are. I'm not sure why that is. Well, I could blame it on my teaching, I suppose, but I have a feeling that I think there's sort of an energy that happens in a group, and when some people are sort of forging ahead, it helps draw others along. And I think maybe I've got some good advantages too that are in here quite a bit, and so there's some modeling going on where they're seeing what's being made on a kind of a higher level, and they're like, maybe I could do this, do that, and so sort of open the gates a little bit for them to try some things that they wouldn't even have thought of. But we want to keep this rounded form, and so I'm going to start in the center with my left hand. It's going to start sliding across. My outside hand is going to push in at the very bottom. They squeeze the clay, they kind of engage, and then they bring the clay up and out, which is what the clay wants to do anyway. So it's going to feel a lot more natural than cylinder did. So the left hand is swinging across, right hand is pushing in, grabbing some of that clay, and then I just bring it up, out, expand this.
This is all extra.
First surface that you throw down, what hit the canvas last faces up toward you, and then what hit the canvas last goes right down on top of it, so you know you're layering it. Okay? So that essentially these two sides come together like this. So I'm throwing one down, that's the side that was on canvas last, and I'm throwing the other side down that was on canvas last on top of it, and then I'll turn it over. Same thing. And you can do that 20 times. That kind of creates this layering system where it's 2 layers, 4 layers, 8, 16. And pretty much, after you do it 15, 20 times, there are no longer any layers. You got this kind of even, homogeneous lump of clay. All the air pockets are driven out. This is a good way to go, especially if you're mixing softer and harder clay together and that sort of thing. But until you're really good at it, it does add more air than it gets rid of. Now, a little bit of an edge right here. So get it going around again. A little bit faster. Yeah. Okay, so now just take the side of the tool. You got it? You start here, and I'd sort of raise it up a little bit, and just shave that a little bit more. Just kind of roll back and forth between your two. Looking up, ease it off. Yeah, that's good.
I didn't get much of a photo because I think they are pretty good.
That's all right. Even if you go down an eighth of an inch, you've done enough to. Well, first of all, I think we have to recognize that art, in and of itself, is purely a selfish act, and so to make it legitimate as a Christian, I tend to have my students write "God loves you," "Jesus loves you" on the bottom of their pots, or some of the theology students do Yahweh, but that's not as broad an understanding as some people would have, and so I figure that way, evangelistically, it's out there. The pots that they're making are out there, or they could do kind of for their own theological sort of internal discourse. They could do Bible verses, maybe. And that's sort of all tongue in cheek here, of course. We talk a little bit about the theology of being makers and being makers in God's image. And so that's sort of discourse goes on. I talk about that, but primarily I talk to them about enjoying and experiencing that part of God's life within them. They've been created by a creative God. They've been recreated through Jesus by a creative God. And all of this, whatever we do in our lives, whether it's physics, whether it's art, whether it's teaching, whether it's nursing, there is a creative act in problem solving and finding better ways to do things. And in art, it's the same thing. And so for my students, maybe 90+% of them are not art majors. They're not going to do this for the rest of their lives, but they're going to have this experience of being kind of primal creators, if you will. I mean, clay is pretty much very, very primal in the medium, and so. I invite them to experience that, to give thanks, to enjoy it, and to be the people that they were made to be. So that's kind of it. It's more an experiential thing. And my facetious sort of beginning was to speak to that thought in some cases where people do feel like art has to be a ministry of some sort, or whatever you do has to be a direct ministry, and how can I tweak this so it'll be legitimate in my mind? And I say, that's not the deal. It's all God's world that we experience, and where do we put our minds and our kind of creative capacities. That's been a funny one. I think as I've looked at that, I've sort of divided things out, and it would be nice to be balanced, but they aren't. Obvious. I mean, to me, it's obvious. Teaching has always been sort of the mainstay, and the my professional kind of aspect of being an artist ends up coming in second. As much as I'd like to say, that's equal balance. I'm an artist. I'm a teacher. That's not the truth in terms of time commitment. And service ends up third. And I think everyone's going to have kind of a different sort of shuffle on this thing, but for me, that's realistically what happens. I'm a teacher, I'm an artist, and then the service part is kind of, as opportunities arise. I recognize one thing about myself. Some people, Dale Johnson, our painter, is this type of person. They can have 9 irons going in the fire. They can do all sorts of things and be involved in a great deal of things. I have tried to kind of hone my life down because I don't have that capacity, mentally or emotionally. And so I'm simplifying and And that's just sort of my balance is an imbalance. Because it's sort of in the blood, I guess. I mean, I still enjoy it. I still believe in Bethel's mission. I still believe in the mission of this art department. I still feel like I fit it. And there's something still that invigorates me when I see lights turn on with students, when they have that opportunity to be these makers. Maybe it's the only time in their life, or maybe they'll continue and pursue it. But it's a kind of a once-in-a-lifetime experience for many, and that opens doors. I mean, I hope and feel that it opens doors to a kind of another aspect to their life that's broadened, and both by way of faith and by way of just life. So I still enjoy it. Advice I'd give to a teacher starting their first year is oh man, it's not always going to be this way. It's just tough. They're putting together their courses maybe for the first time. They're just trying to balance a lot, and so I just want to let them know it gets better. For a fifth-year teacher, if they've got tenure, I'd say settle down. They've gone through the wars, and the likelihood is that maybe kids are there in their lives and all that sort of thing, and they may need to find some balance and recognize that they can't be burning the candle all the time. And for a 15th year, I thought about this, and I wasn't coming up with anything, I don't think. I feel like it's just kind of enjoy the professional aspect of your life. I mean, I think by then your craft of teaching has probably been tweaked and maneuvered, and you've improved that. And at this point in time, whatever, if you're writing, if you're researching, if you're making, there may be opportunity there to put more emphasis on that and to experience it in a broader, deeper way. I continue to grow as a teacher by continuing to grow as an artist. And so it's in my studio, the work that I'm doing, as I'm looking forward to shows or whatever it is, just the making aspect sort of keeps me charged up. And so, that translates pretty directly into the things that I'm teaching, and keeps me excited. And that's particularly true. Maybe it's not so true at the beginning level, but it's particularly true as I move and become more of a mentor for the advanced students, because the work that I'm doing there is a little bit more probably. They're able to assimilate that a little bit more and to kind of recognize it, and so I think that's how it happens with me, at least. I hope my legacy is one that opened doors for people. Again, in just whether it's once in a lifetime or whether it's a lifetime of artistic experience in this particular medium, that it's something that was a gift given that they could assimilate and enjoy and have as a part of their lives. Another thing, I'm trying to remember back when Dan Taylor was retiring. They were doing a little spoof on his thing, and I think Joey Horseman was the one who said, Taylor hasn't been around here for a long time. And, if I'm recognized, if I can slide out gracefully, and that'll be fine by me too.